I started seeing something that I had never seen before in my clinical experience. And that was a lot of anger, a lot of emotional dysregulation in the betrayed individuals in ways that I'd never, ever seen. I'm sorry generally doesn't work very well. They're looking for an awareness of their emotions, an awareness of their pain, emotions associated with their suffering. When your body's in a constant state of stress for that long, it wreaks havoc on the human body.
Hey everybody, Hunter Otis here with pornfree.com. I help men quit porn, get the life that you actually want, free from pornography. I have my wife, Nicole, here with us as well. She's a certified sex addiction therapist. But most importantly, today we have our guest, Kevin Skinner, Dr. Kevin Skinner with us. Really excited to chat with him today. Kevin is an expert when it comes to many things, but specifically today, we're talking betrayal trauma. And for the men listening today, this is one that you definitely want to pay attention to, because I know so many of the guys that I work with are just struggling with, how do I show up for my wife? How do I navigate through this? What do I say? How do I behave? What do I think? What do I do? It's a very difficult thing to navigate through. So this is going to be huge for you men, but also for the women listening to this. If you're new to trying to come to an understanding of what is going on and how to handle the hurt and the trauma that you're experiencing, if you've discovered recent intimate betrayal in your relationship or dishonesty or what have you, this is going to be very insightful for you as well. So we can kind of all get on the same page and help you just successfully navigate the path forward. But Kevin, why don't you go ahead and just quick introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you, what you would like us to know anyway, and how did you kind of step into this field of betrayal trauma, addiction recovery? I mean, all this good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So good to be with you guys, Hunter and Nicole. I appreciate this opportunity. Let me begin a little bit of my background. I've been doing therapy for about 30 years. And when you're a therapist for this long, you see a lot of cycles, you see a lot of things change. But one thing that hasn't changed is what happens after infidelity, sexual betrayal, the discovery of a partner's hidden porn use, secretive sexual behaviors, some people refer to as sexual deception, whatever term you're looking at here. One of the things that really got me into this was actually a failure. And what I mean by that is, I'd been through my master's program, Lincoln, Nebraska. And then I came to Brigham Young University, got my PhD in marriage and family therapy. And that was, from 96 to 2000. Graduating with the PhD, I thought I understood a lot about therapy. And then I started seeing just a myriad of cases, people dealing with some form of sexual infidelity and betrayal. And I started seeing something that I had never seen before in my clinical experience, which is about that point 5 years. And that was a lot of anger, a lot of emotional dysregulation, and in the betrayed individuals in ways that I'd never, ever seen. I'm like, what is this? What are we experiencing here? And I had a client in particular come in, and my office wasn't very big at the time, but the emotional intensity that she had, I think the rest of my office probably heard her side of the conversation that day. And I'll be honest with you, I had no idea how to help, what we were actually dealing with. It was actually, quite frankly, it was overwhelming at that time. Fortunately, a few months later, I was talking with a friend, and she said, I think they're experiencing post-traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at the time, post-traumatic stress was for war veterans and it was for other people, but it just didn't make a lot of sense. And then I looked at the symptoms, the nightmares, the flashbacks, the avoiding people and places, and then the negative cognitions, like, what's wrong with me? How am I so stupid? Why didn't I see this earlier? And you begin to see those symptoms and you recognize, man, they're experiencing a lot of these PTSD symptoms that we aren't really talking about. And so that was really my initial experience with this, is actually not knowing what to do, and really put a lot of energy into it since then, trying to make sure that I understand it the best. And in truth, I've gathered research with about 20,000 people at this point who've been betrayed. So I have a large sample, understanding more of what people have been betrayed, what they experience. So I don't feel like I'm guessing on how to best help them. And then in truth, helping their spouse who has betrayed them know how to understand, how to communicate, how to understand, maybe develop some empathy for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, kind of say you're one of the kind of originators of this whole betrayal trauma idea, right?
Uh, the research, I would probably say the beginning, Barbara Steffens, Robin Rennie, 2006. But I would say in terms of gathering research, I probably do have the largest sample of betrayed partners. And I really have tried moving it forward because I think betrayed partners haven't had a voice. And in many situations, I feel like they've been misunderstood.
Yeah.
So I did a TED talk in 2017, 2018, and it's called The Other Side of Infidelity. And in that TED talk, I actually talked about my research and what betrayed partners have experienced.
Yeah. And you've written a book on it as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I wrote a book, Treating Trauma from Sexual Betrayal. It was the 2019 International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals. It was their book of the year, one of their books of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And just to give you guys some background too, several years ago when Nicole became a CSAT, Kevin was one of her supervisors through that, working through. Go ahead.
And trainers, with the ITAP was amazing. He's wonderful in his training and supervision, and that's why we're so excited to have you here today to talk more about the betrayal trauma part of it.
Yeah, so we're really, Kevin is just coming with a wealth of knowledge, experience, understanding, research. And so this is just, we're again really grateful to have you here and ready to dig in. So I guess maybe we just start off by talking a little bit about our men, right? I understand, obviously, it's a difficult thing to navigate for women. It's also difficult to navigate for men, especially successfully, right? And I just have so many men that they come to me and like, I just don't know what to do. I don't, they're honestly kind of coming more from a defensive place and maybe even more kind of blame shifting onto their partners. But I think a lot of this is happening because they just are clueless as to what to do. I guess if you can kind of lead the charge forward from there, and just so we can start a path forward on how to help these men get to better clarity and empathy as to how to navigate this path forward with their partner.
Well, this is such a great topic. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to come on with you guys, because I think there's so much misinformation. And I really think that many of the people who've been acting out, whether it's viewing pornography or acting out in other sexual ways, when they get caught, many of them almost knew that they were going to get caught. They sometimes, they don't think they're going to get caught, but then in the background, if you ask them, it's like, yeah, I knew it was going to come. Now I don't know what to do, because what they can't predict is how their partner or spouse is going to respond. Mm-hmm. Because some individuals like, oh, they'll just get over this. Or I have often heard people say, well, why can't you just get over this?
Yep.
And so you start hearing that statement, why can't you get over this? Often the reason why, and this is hopefully will be helpful to your listeners who are trapped in this, is no longer does your partner feel safe. And it's not necessarily because they're afraid of abuse, physical abuse. It's because we feel safe when we know that the other person will be there for us. And what happens with, say, pornography or other forms of infidelity, we begin to question, am I enough? Is there something wrong with me? And they feel replaced. And many times they will start to show signs of, I have to now protect myself. And when I'm protecting myself, I typically go into fight or flight mode. And when you're fighting, you're going to find that your partner's angrier maybe than she or he has ever been. Yelling, screaming, put downs, criticism. And so what that is, and this is really important for everyone to understand, it's a defensive posture because I don't necessarily feel safe anymore in your presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so if we keep going from that, the person who is acting out typically doesn't know what to say. Like, what do I say there? I'm sorry is rarely going to be enough.
Right.
What do you mean? I said I was sorry. Well, if we break that down, what does the sorry even mean? I'm sorry for what?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then go ahead, Nicole.
Saying, that trauma is like that rug being pulled out from you, right? And it's like that trust. The trust is gone, right? Like you trust, like if you're leaning up against a wall and you trust that wall to hold you up and support you, but then all of a sudden that wall isn't there. You don't trust the thing that that was going to hold you up in life. That the very thing that like kind of was the grounding for you. And when that's not there, and it's just that rug being pulled out. And when that wall isn't there anymore, it's so it's so debilitating. So
Yeah. And I think what you find there is a lot of anger, right? And in the research that I've gathered, anger is one of the most common responses. Well, two of them really. I often hear, I'm angrier than I've ever been, and I don't know how to stop the triggers. So I could be in public, I could be in different places, and I'm triggered. Even a television show can trigger me. And all of a sudden, we're in this huge argument. And often the person who is either looking at pornography or acting out sexually in some other way, they don't know what to say.
Right.
What can they say there? And so in many instances, they freeze up. And that's exactly the opposite of what their partner needs.
yeah.
And so I've been acting out, but I don't know what to say. I don't know how to comfort. And then the end result is we have two people who are in a lot of pain, and neither one know what to do or say.
Yes, I see a lot, and this I experienced for myself too with us going through our own recovery. It's like you don't know what to say. You feel a load of shame. So your partner is upset and sharing all this pain with you, and you feel a ton of shame and go really one down big time, right? And then just get defensive because then you're taking it super personal, right? And maybe it's a pretty intense, it can be very intense, right? But then you kind of go the polar opposite and then can go on the attack towards your partner, who's the one that's in tons of pain that needs you to really show up right now. But I think like what you're describing, it's like you just are also having this freeze response and just truly just don't know what to do. And we're just kind of going into these automatic reactions.
So from a biological perspective, let's just look at it purely from a biological perspective. What you have somebody who's escalated, say the betrayed partner is now angry. Well, from a biological perspective, when someone's angry at you, what are the alternatives? What are the actual options? Well, I can shut down, meaning I pull away, which is to flee from the anger. That's not an uncommon response. Or I could fight, which is, you're never going to get over this. Well, was it really that big of a deal? And so what you begin to see is a fight-flight response, which actually doesn't solve the problem, but that's what's happening. So when a person's angry, the betraying spouse has to figure out, do I go into fight? Do I flee? In some situations, they will freeze and shut down completely and just not know what to say. And that's not a fight or flight. That's just a shutdown.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, our brains are designed to have an alternative response to the fight or flight or freeze response. And that is when we use the prefrontal cortex. But what that requires is for the person who truly wants to repair the damage that's been created is to stay present with their partner's pain. And most individuals in the beginning of their healing and recovery process, they don't know how to do that. So when their partner's angry, they usually are tapping into their shame. And the shame voice is, you know what? I knew it. I was a failure. Why don't you just divorce me? I've let everybody down. I don't know what to do. So, and so they literally, there's this internal dialogue of I'm a failure, the voice of shame. And as long as you're in shame, the phrase I use is you can't hold your partner's pain.
Yeah.
So a solution there is you need to develop self-compassion, which is literally an alternative to shame. Self-compassion is not justifying the behavior. It's recognizing that my partner's in pain and I want to be able to help them in their pain. But in order for me to do that, I need to be able to look in the mirror and say, you know what? I need to strive to be a better human being. I need to be better for my partner, for my spouse, because they deserve better.
Yeah. Which makes it really difficult for someone who struggles with sexually acting out behaviors because they have a difficult time with even holding their own emotions, right? Because oftentimes they're escaping and running from their own emotions or having compassion and empathy for themselves. And so now they don't know how to do that. And then they're forced into this work, or you could say that they really don't know how because their automatic response is to go into that fight, flight, freeze, shut down, toxic shame, which has kind of been the common thing for someone who struggles with those behaviors. And then now they're having and would like to have that empathy for their partner, but they just don't know how because they have never been able to.
Well, and when you look at, let's just take it from the person who was acting out, more often than not, their sexual behaviors are coping mechanisms to get away from emotions that they don't want to have, that they're not comfortable with. And so when you start looking at the history of people who are acting out, most of them begin in their young adult years. If it's pornography exposure, it's age 11, age 9, age 10, somewhere, in those areas. So what's in essence happening is you've developed a coping mechanism for years. Now you're in this committed relationship, and those patterns don't just disappear because they were coping strategies that people turned to earlier in life. A betrayed spouse doesn't understand that. That makes no sense, right? Because I thought, we were this team. We were committed to each other. And so now I do feel that betrayal. I do feel like, I'm not enough for you. I feel like I'm comparing myself. And how can I compare to the images that you're actually looking at? And so many times there's that shame that kicks in the betrayed, that I'm not enough.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, it's interesting because we're talking this, it's really a skill then, right? To be able to cope with your own emotions. I mean, when you've just either been discovered or maybe proactively have told the truth, and your whole world within the relationship starts to fall apart, it's like, well, now you're removing or attempting to remove this coping mechanism. You've just told your partner, coping mechanism removed, and you have no skills to now deal with all the pain. So you see a lot of, relapsing, a lot of going back, even in the midst of such disastrous pain, right? Because they're going back, and the brain wants to go to that coping mechanism, right? To try to deal. Now you have the most intense pain that this person probably wants to try to avoid at all costs beforehand or afterwards, but the coping mechanism is removed. So it sounds to me, this is what I teach my men, right? It's like, okay, well, you got to go all in on the skill of your own personal emotional regulation, or how in the world do you think you're going to be able to go through some of those extremely difficult conversations?
Yeah. And in essence, what you're saying there is I have to learn how to be with difficult emotions.
Yeah.
The recovery process is learning how to be with your own difficult emotions. I don't like feeling anxious. I don't like feeling like a failure. I don't feel like I'm not enough. I don't like that feeling. And more important, they're trying to stop a behavior that has been a part of their coping mechanism for 10 or 20 or even 30 years. And so everybody needs to understand that this is a process. Change is a process. Rarely do people go cold turkey. They have to learn how to deal with difficult emotions. And now we have to deal with the relationship fracture, attachment injury that has occurred because of the betrayal. So again, this is a process. It's usually why it takes time, because you don't just automatically give up patterns from the past. You have the shame that you have to deal with, the internalized, something's wrong with me, I feel like a failure. And simultaneously, your partner's upset, maybe even raging at you because you're the one who betrayed them and let them down.
Yeah. And then you might continue to reopen those wounds through, sliding back into those coping behaviors that aren't helpful, rather than causing the damage to begin with. And then how does this person then reconcile with ongoing damage? It didn't just happen the one time and they now told me the truth. Now they told me the truth, maybe made the promises, I'll never do it again. And now it's happening again. And we both don't understand why or how, or, how we would cross this bridge again over and over. Yeah.
So
go ahead.
So there's a part there that I would say, all of this is happening in a very short period of time. It's very, right. There's a lot going on. That's why accountability, that's why getting support, that's why therapy, that's why group support, all of those things in place together give people the structure that makes recovery more of a possibility. More often than not, people try one or two things, but rarely do they try all these things together. And so the consequence is I try a bite of this and I try a bite of that, but never do I put it all together, because there's a term called recovery capital. And recovery capital is what they looked at in the research with individuals dealing with drug and alcohol addiction, or what we refer to as dependency or misuse. And what they discovered is that many individuals who were whatever the substance was, those who were sober for 5 years, they did common things. what we call recovery capital. And rarely did the people who succeed for more than 5 years, rarely was it one thing that they did. There were multiple activities that they engaged in that helped them in the recovery journey. And so if you're just starting in this journey, it's a multitude of things. It's not one thing, it's a lot of things that need to be incorporated into that recovery process.
Yeah. Would you say the same would apply to the betrayed partner as well? Like, are there clear indicators of like recovery capital that betrayed partners should be doing as well to help assist their recovery?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We've actually been identifying that because it's not just one thing. But what we do know, for example, from the betrayed partners, is they're experiencing a lot of PTSD symptoms.
Right.
But before you can really deal with the PTSD symptoms, they need to be heard and validated and understood, because more often than not, they don't feel like anybody's listening to their pain.
Yeah. Right.
So before yes, they're experiencing post-traumatic stress, the anger, the avoiding people or places that remind them of their partner's behaviors, the negative thoughts, but ultimately they need to feel understood and validated. Like their pain has to be understood in that kind of a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to say this. It's the crisis stage. Like when there's that discovery, it's a crisis, and it's a real crisis and trauma. And oftentimes, though, I've seen a lot of betrayed partners that they don't turn to anybody for support.
They really isolate
because of that shame.
Yeah.
And if any of us who go through trauma or loss or grief, like to have a community around us that can support us and help us through that, and through that crisis stage for both people.
Right.
And I always say 3 things need to be healed. It's the him, the her, and the us, or the betrayed, the person acting out, and the relationship. And all 3 need that support.
So
go ahead, Kevin.
So in my book, Treating Trauma from Sexual Betrayal, I actually talk about this. I have a kind of a model, and that first model is, in order for anybody to heal, we have to have safety. Mm-hmm. So the person acting out, the person who's been betrayed, safety is paramount. When I refer to safety, it's emotional safety. The power of a group for somebody who's been acting out. Let's say that a betrayed partner is angry, and it's like often I hear that phrase, "Why can't you just get over this?" Well, before you try to address just that statement, if you went to a group and you were in a group where somebody understood you and they helped you understand your pain, then you're more likely to be able to be with your partner in their pain. But if the group is turning you against, oh, your spouse is crazy, that's not going to be an effective group, because people in pain, they're really responding to protect themselves. And so anger, if you'll put it in the context of what is your spouse's anger? Their anger is that they feel the deception, and they feel let down, and they feel like you've hidden and deceived them. And that makes them feel like, I'm not safe. And really, Sue Johnson, she said it this way, it's a question. Are you there for me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And betrayed partners don't know if you're there for them. And you say, well, it's just pornography. No, it's not just pornography. It's something that makes them feel like they're not enough for you. And it's a comparison. And it's a feeling of what else is happening in your life.
Right.
And so all of those things combined, and if you can put yourself into your partner's shoes metaphorically and develop empathy, then empathy being with your partner in their emotions without it overwhelming your emotions, really what you're developing is compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I often say that you need, like in this work, for empathy, you need to hold on to yourself in warm regard and your partner in warm regard. But when your body is in, I call it tornado brain, you're in like fight, flight, or freeze. That's really difficult to hold yourself in warm regard and not to go in that one down toxic shame, right? Or to get defensive or go into those things that aren't going to be helpful. But that's the work that you have to do in those really difficult conversations, is to hold yourself in that with compassion and warm regard and your partner.
Yeah. And I think too, for men, it's like understanding that, man, I mean, trust is everything, right? For our relationships, not just in our intimate relationships, but in society. Like, you go drive down the road, you got to trust that people are going to do their best to follow the laws and not come crashing into you when you're driving, in order to be able to trust driving, for example, right? But when that rug is pulled out, it's like your partner just became a bed of snakes, because you just don't, do I really know them? Is there more that I don't know? There's just so many question marks then that pop up for the betrayed partner. And so to expect them to then just, when are you going to get over this? It's like, you got to understand that their entire world has just been turned upside down. And it's not just about this one thing. It's now they have to now kind of come to grips with this feeling of like, I don't even know who you are. I don't know what else there is. It's like a big mystery. And now I have to come to know you and know my environment. And I just have to question everything.
Yeah. And when I was going through my betrayal trauma, that is something that I experienced where I just felt like I could not trust anybody. Like even in my own family, my father, like men particularly, I had no trust. Like my bishop, like anybody that I lost trust for everybody. And it was a really like this place where I felt like I couldn't turn to anybody because I didn't know who I could trust. So it was really just debilitating. But one of the things that I thought might be helpful for our listeners and maybe for the men particularly is maybe you could share a little bit more of what those PTSD symptoms are, or maybe what kind of things that are going to come up for someone who is experiencing betrayal trauma. Because I think that might be helpful for our listeners to even understand what are some of the symptoms.
Yeah, great. So let me address this by what we call the criteria. There are 5 core criteria of PTSD, and this is where I have been gathering the research for almost 20 years now. Again, when you start getting 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 people, you start to see the patterns aren't changing. It's predictable. And these samples are people from our clinics. They're also samples from people online. So these are just in general people who've been betrayed. So the first one is what we refer to as criteria A. And if there's one that isn't happening a lot, well, I say a lot, less than the others, and that is a threat to life. And most people say, well, that doesn't really apply to me. Except it does when we start looking at the threat of getting an STD or an STI.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so if about 6 out of 10 betrayed partners have a fear that they could get an STI, right? Sexual infection in some version.
Right.
So that's one. But again, that's about 6 out of 10 have that fear. Actual happening in a relationship is less than that, but there is ultimately that feeling of, are there other things going on? And so that's a common fear.
Right.
Now, criteria B is where the rubber meets the road. You begin to have nightmares, flashbacks, being triggered in a variety of places, at the mall, at the grocery store, with your friends, with your family. And Nicole, as you're referring to earlier, I was looking around, I didn't know who was safe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So now criteria C is we then begin to avoid people or places, situations that remind us of what our partner did. So it might be difficult to go to church.
Yeah.
It's difficult going to a mall or turning on the television and watching a television show. So criteria C is avoidance. B is reliving it with the triggers and the nightmares. Criteria E is a negative cognitions and mood. I'm unlovable, I'm not enough, I'm worthless, I'm a failure. And you start listening to that internal dialogue. And what's happening in the betrayed spouse there is they're internalizing it. If I was better, if I was enough, my spouse wouldn't have done this. So that criteria D, is that negative cognition. I'm stupid, I'm not enough, I'm a failure as a wife, or whatever the situation may be. That's really common.
And can I add depression and anxiety as well to that many experienced depression?
Yeah, so the depression would fit in that criteria D, because the depressive mood is a sadness and overwhelmed, just an emptiness, and this visceral feeling of, I just feel, And so that influences how they sleep, which influences their energy, which influences angry episodes. And so you begin to see how that is influencing many aspects of their lives.
Right.
Or even one thing that I experienced too is I couldn't eat. Like I felt sick almost when I ate, just because I really felt like literally like a truck hit me. Right. And so my body was really going through this, experiencing some trauma. And so I just felt like I couldn't eat. And so as for some women, they might overeat. Some might not be eating, but like you said, sleep issues as well, having a hard time sleeping.
Yeah, and I was looking at the sleep. I asked the question about how it's influenced sleep patterns. And often I'd hear 2 hours of sleep and I'd wake up startled, 4 hours of sleep and I couldn't get back to sleep. I can't sleep. And you'd begin to see that. And now I've got to go perform and be a mom, or I've got to go to work, or I've got to, I had a medical doctor and his wife had betrayed him and in a scenario, he was having to perform these major surgeries. I mean, so again, betrayal can go both directions, but man, I'll tell you what, it influences our concentration. There's so many areas that I call it the burden of sexual betrayal, because both partners are carrying this burden. It's not just one. You talked about the we, Nicole. Both partners I'm experiencing it. You're experiencing something. We as a couple are experiencing it. And even as you described, I can't eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I often say it's one of the worst diets you can go on.
Right.
Yeah.
In one of my trainings, I think it was you that said that you had a group of women, and many of them really had some illnesses like cancer. Was that you that shared that? And
Yeah. So it was an interesting situation. It wasn't actually my group. I was talking with another clinician, and there was a group that was going on, and they said 3 out of the 10 individuals had been diagnosed with cancer post discovery. And so if you look at the work of researchers, one of the common themes is that stress creates all kinds of havoc on the body. And when we are having elevated levels of stress, again, our bodies don't respond well. So consistent stress over time, and that was what I began to look at the research. How long have you been experiencing these symptoms? A month, 6 months, a year, 2 years. And a majority had been experiencing these symptoms well over a year, some of them 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years. When your body's in a constant state of stress for that long, it wreaks havoc on the human body. It really attacks the body. So
Yeah.
It's not if it's going to be impacted, it's how it's going to be.
Right. Yeah. So you can see some really major illnesses arise when somebody's underneath like that level of oxidative constant stress, right, on the body, just breaks the body down. And I think like this is so important, one for the women listening to this that are being so hard on themselves, right? Because a lot of them are when you're going through something so difficult. But for men, I mean, to be able to really put yourself in your partner's shoes and understand, okay, they're not just being angry at you. There's so much more going on here. And understandably so that they're angry, but look at the layers, the levels. I mean, I could see this in Nicole. It's like, we had 3 little girls at the time, they're tiny when we're going through the thick of all this stuff. And like you were saying, to have to not sleep, to not be able to eat, to be in such pain, and then have to function as a mom with these humans that need you so much, that take so much energy. I mean, I hope that this can really help you guys listening to see, like, to help you really start to open your heart to that compassion of what they're going through. Yes, are they saying hard things? Maybe are they going on the attack? Maybe are they reacting very strongly? Absolutely. But maybe that's what we can get into next, is like how do they then show up when their partner is in that maybe fight mode and attack mode or what have you? How do they show up in those moments when they don't know what to say or how to respond?
I love this conversation point, because what you're saying is in this moment, what is the right response? I'll tell you what doesn't work very well, and then we'll talk about what does work well. I often hear the statement, "I'm sorry."
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry generally doesn't work very well. Let me explain why. Because most people will say, "I'm sorry," every time their partner is angry. Their partner isn't looking for the "I'm sorry." They're looking for an awareness of their emotions, an awareness of their pain, emotions associated with their suffering. So if I say to you, "I'm sorry," how should I interpret that? What is it that you're sorry for? So I wrote a book, Rebuild Your Relationship After Sexual Betrayal, and I have a chapter titled Why I'm Sorry Isn't Working. And really what I'm trying to highlight there is try apologizing, try making amends without the words, I'm sorry. It requires a deeper level of thinking. Example, my behaviors were wrong, and I regret that it created so much pain in you. Now contrast that statement with, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
I said I was sorry.
Well, if you were sorry, you wouldn't have done it. If you were
Right.
sorry, you wouldn't have hurt me so much. If you were sorry, right?
Right.
Like,
Exactly. So now let's take that. If I was sorry, so let's say that I have said, well, I'm sorry. Now imagine with me that you said, well, let me explain what I'm sorry about.
Mhm.
And I say something to the effect of, I wake up in the mornings thinking how much I let you down. Throughout the day, I feel regret for my behaviors. And I realized that throughout our lives together, I've hidden behaviors. I've been deceptive. I haven't been honest with you, and you didn't deserve that.
Mm.
What does that feel like to you, Nicole?
Well, it sounds wonderful. And what I'm hearing in each of those is accountability and empathy in those sorry statements. Like, I am sorry that this created so much grief in you, that my behaviors that I chose have done this. But it does, it feels more genuine, it feels authentic, and it feels like you're being heard more.
and it doesn't sound defensive, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting there is you don't get there on autopilot. You have to think through this process because far too often, I'm sorry gets you out of it's my way of saying, I don't want to think about this anymore. I'm sorry.
Right,
I don't
right.
want to fight anymore. I'm sorry. In contrast with a behavior and emotional awareness, I'm working to change my behaviors. It hasn't been easy. I've been struggling, and I want to be a better person. I want to be better for you and for our relationship. Again, it's an expression of commitment. It's an expression I'm aware. It's an expression that I am present. I want to be in this relationship. Betrayed partners, more than anything, they are questioning, are you in? Are you going to be there? Are you committed? Are you not committed? That's the information they're trying to get from you. I'm sorry by itself won't do it.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
Would
That's
you
great.
say that like a more reflective way of communication is helpful? Like, for example, I think it's Harville Hendricks talks about mirroring. And so when your partner is really upset and really angry, maybe they're on the attack a bit. Maybe they're, very directly pointing things out that you've done, right? The automatic reaction is to want to get defensive and protect,
Or shut down.
or to shut down,
Mm-hmm.
go into toxic shame. But instead, stepping out of that and stepping into what I'm hearing you say is, and making sure that they know you're listening, that you've heard them.
For sure. And even there, it's not the first wave. Because you might be there for that first wave. I call it the first wave of intensity. So there might be this initial phase of anger and upset and then you're present and you're like, you're right, I did make a mistake. And then the second wave may come. And the second wave is, well, then why did you do it? And if I'm really angry, I might call you a name in French or Spanish or German.
Yeah.
Yep.
And really what I'm saying there is, so then why did you do it? It's wave number 2. That's a really good question. I realize that that's something that I need to think through, because if I was thinking, I wouldn't have done those things.
Yeah.
Wave number 3, well, you're such a jerk. Why did you do that? Can't you see how much pain you've created me? And can't you see how much pain you've created? And so now it's wave number 3. Often we think it's the first wave, I'm sorry. Or, and again, that somehow that's going to suffice the pain. But usually it's the third and the fourth and the fifth wave of I'm really wanting to stay present with you in your pain, and I'm not running away, and I'm not escaping, and I'm not hiding. That's when we see the most progress, is people being able to withstand and be with the waves. I call it the Miyagi approach. And if you're familiar with the Karate Kid, it's, wax on, wax off, wax on. I'm here, right? Here it is. I'm with you. And I'm not running. I'm not fleeing. I'm not fighting. I'm with you in your pain. And yes, that's right. And I did do that. And it's an awareness. It's with warmth and it's caring. And that takes practice to get to that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear a lot of men will say, I was good for this long. Like we went back and forth for 30 minutes. I stayed calm. And then I just got to that point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And then I just, flew off the handle. What do you say?
Well,
what do you say to them in that situation?
Yeah.
My response is, of course you did. Because you too got worn out and you felt attacked and you felt like, it was never going to be enough. So general rule of thumb that I give to all couples, when you've been going for hours, you need to take a break so your marriage has a chance.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that we aren't going to talk about this, but there needs to be a time constraint. For example, if you're exhausted, tired, worn out, and you're going from 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, when your energy is depleted, your capacity to solve problems goes down significantly. And so, of course, after an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours of this same dialogue, neither one of you feel like you're going to get to an answer or a solution. And then what I tell couples in situations like that, my favorite one is to stop talking. And actually, if you're willing to, let your partner just hold you. Now, some betrayed partners say, I can't do that. I'm too angry. Some say that would be wonderful. Because ultimately what the betrayed partner is looking for is they're looking for reassurance. They're looking for comfort. They're looking for your presence. They're looking for you to be with them. Except for we're trying to do it through words. Words are rarely going to be the most effective way. Because how do I say why, when you say, why did you do that? There's never going to be a good answer. It's all a justification. Everything that you try to come up with, well, I was tired. I've been dealing with this since I was a little boy. I was stressed at work. Excuse, excuse, excuse.
Yep.
I was wrong. You didn't deserve it. And I'm committed to doing the best I can to being with you and the spouse you deserve now. Can I give you a foot massage? Now, some people might like that. Some won't. But the point is couples need to know how to communicate it without words. And they need to make sure that they're not doing it late into the night. That's the biggest mistake. One of the biggest mistakes that couples make in the repair process is they try to do it when there's no energy or low energy.
Mm-hmm. When that energy has run out and one partner knows they're just at their limit and they can't handle anymore, how do they tactfully take a break?
So I have a course called How to Communicate When You Don't Know What to Say. It's on my website, humanintimacy.com, and I have a secret in there. And here's the secret. It's called an adult timeout. We give children timeouts, right? Let's take a break. Adults, we don't think we need that because we're mature enough. But during a timeout, it's actually a reflection on how I can best communicate to my spouse what I'm experiencing and what I'm feeling. So to say, can we take a break? It's late. Can we talk about this tomorrow morning? Or could we talk about it tomorrow afternoon? And I will think about what your core questions are so I can come and address them more effectively. There's key components here. One is I'm acknowledging that this is important. I'm setting a time to do it again the next day. And I'm identifying that I need to do this and I need to think through this because what you are saying is important. So I'm validating, I'm listening, I'm seeking to understand, and I'm not brushing it off. Many times people take a time out and they never come back to it. And that's why many people are so frustrated. It's like, well, we never resolve it.
Yeah.
Right.
Instead, we're going to take a break. We're going to take a time out, and I'm going to be way more intentional about this.
Yeah. It's like Terry Reilly says, if you take a time out, like first you say, I'll be back in 15 minutes. And then if you are not ready, then you communicate, right? You communicate with your partner, say, I need more time. It'll actually be 30 minutes, or then it's an hour. Then it's, I need a few hours, but I am coming back. Right? It's like communicating that you will return.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two parts to this. While we are apart, it's absolutely essential that I do the work rather than just let go get a bigger gun, because I can go get a bigger gun. I can become defensive. But what happens when I come back and say, okay, I have a really simple formula of what you should do while you're away. What's the issue? Why is it an issue? And how do I best communicate it?
Mm.
It's what I call the what, the why, and the how. What's happening here? My spouse is really upset because I wasn't home on time, or because I have relapsed. And why are they upset? Because they don't feel safe with me. So how do I acknowledge the pain that they're in at this time?
Mm-hmm.
Those types of internalized questions keep you out of being the victim of their anger. And being the victim of their anger is absolutely how you're going to fail, because you're the victim of their rage instead of realizing I'm the one who created the pain. Now, I can hear some people saying, yeah, but they're not getting over it. Usually people aren't getting over it because they feel like their pain isn't being heard or validated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it sounds like when both partners take that break to do what you said, but also it's really about calming down your nervous system, calming down your heart, like, right? Because all that's elevated, all that's, it's hard to think when your blood is like just overtaking your prefrontal cortex, right? And so it really truly is okay to take that break and do deep breathing, do journaling, listen to music, go for a walk, whatever. And then, but then, yeah, the key point that we're making is that when you're ready to come back together, right, and not ignore it. Right?
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I had a question. How long does it take for someone who is going through this? I know that there's probably not like an exact answer, but how long do you say it takes for someone to work through that betrayal trauma, or to heal, or for trust to start coming back online? Have you noticed anything like that in your research?
Yeah, I don't actually look at time. I look at experiences.
Okay.
So I rarely try to put a time frame on this, because it's not time. It's actually, and I'm going to go through very specific steps that help accelerate the healing journey. So one is actually being heard and validated in the pain. So usually I administer an assessment to actually identify the PTSD symptoms, the trauma symptoms, understand the nature of the relationship, so I get a bigger picture of their story. When a person feels heard and understood, they actually, just recently I've had an experience working with somebody who literally thought that they were going crazy, panic attacks, just so much anxiety. And as we were outlining the symptoms and the experience, it was like the lights were clicking on, and she's like, oh, and it's almost like this is normal. What I'm experiencing, I'm not going crazy. And so in the recovery, the healing process, it's actually feeling validated and understood. What you're experiencing is normal. So first part of that is, do you feel heard? Do you feel validated? Do you feel understood? The next part of that is identifying, do I have the information? Because many betrayed partners go into a information gathering mode. Lots of questions. Question. What about this? What about this? Did you do this? Did you do that? And so when they start to get information, they begin to make sense of the story. They might not like the story, but if they don't have the story, they don't know what's actually occurred, then they're guessing. And guessing is usually going to be worst case scenario guessing mode. So if they have the proper information, which is, again, one of the reasons why we do a disclosure of what occurred, the research is very clear on this. People who do a disclosure have better outcomes. They talk more about the details. They're more likely to stay married because they're talking about these important details. So now, are they getting the information? If information is being withheld, it's going to be a more difficult process to heal.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like almost like that rug getting pulled out, and that it's the getting the pieces to the story is helping to recreate that, like that solid ground almost.
That's right. And when I don't have that information, again, because of I don't know if what you're telling me is true, I ask the question, is there more? Is there more? Is there more? But when a person does a disclosure and they reveal the information, they don't withhold anything, the research shows that they're more likely to stay together. In fact, there's a researcher, Peggy Vaughn, she assessed 1,000 individuals who had been betrayed. And of those who were still married, 86% of them talked about the details of what had occurred. Whereas another bucket, only 55% were still together if they did not talk about the details. So sometimes you need to do a full disclosure in a therapeutic setting. Some couples try to do it on their own. But in general, when you're guided in how to best do that, usually it leads to better outcomes. So feeling or understood, having the information, those are two really critical ones to the healing journey. And then we start looking at how it's influenced how I perceive myself. We look at post-traumatic stress symptoms, and we see how it's internally impacting my life, sleep patterns, eating habits, nightmares, flashbacks, triggers, and how the coupleship works through that can accelerate the healing, or it can bog it down because they're not learning how to work through those critical, crucial conversations.
Yeah, and anyone listening, just recently we did an episode with Dan Drake, who's a disclosure expert, and I'll put a link below the video for that. If you're interested in learning more about disclosure, we did a whole interview with him, so feel free to check that out. But yeah, that's massive. I mean, just for you to be able to have the data, to be able to start piecing your life back together is so critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a really important piece to rebuilding trust, and a healing part for, once again, both people and the relationship. It can be.
And it's not fun, piece. Right? It's not fun, no. But to be able to see, hey, someone is willing to get completely vulnerable and put it all on the table and do it in a healthy way, right? Mm-hmm. Not the staggered disclosure or, not holding anything back, but and it's delivered very well, right? With no excuses, justifications, just full ownership like that. It's a huge signal that this person is really taking the repair of this damage seriously.
And let's take it to the next step. It's not just talking about the details of what you did. So trained as a certified sex addiction therapist, there's 3 parts to this process, right? So you've got the disclosure, full disclosure, not a partial, not hidden behaviors, a full disclosure, followed by an impact letter where the betrayed partner is talking about the betrayal, how it influences them, which is really helpful to understand, because the reparative process is, as Nicole said, it's a 3-part process. If the betraying partner doesn't know how the betrayed partner is feeling, their experiences and how it's impacted them, then it's really one directional. But we want to make this bi-directional, where the betrayed partner has a chance to do what we call an impact letter, which is really helpful. So the betrayed partner can talk about how this discovery, how this information has impacted them. That then is followed by what we call an emotional restitution letter, the 3rd part of this process. In my experience, that letter is so profoundly healing when it's done properly. Because what in essence you're doing is you're identifying how I lied, how I manipulated, what's referred to as gaslighting, how I gaslit you, how I hid my behaviors, how I deceived you. And if I'm willing to do that, I'm literally saying, here's my playbook. Here's how I hid my behaviors, and here's how I deceived you. And the acknowledgement of that does wonders for the betrayed partner in the healing journey. Most people won't go through that 3-step process that I just outlined, because it is work. But when people do it, it is profoundly powerful.
Well, maybe this is a good place to start to wrap up. I mean, this has just been loaded with so many things. I mean, because I get it. I get that uncomfortable, very painful place on the kind of the betrayer's side of things, of just, I've caused all this damage. What do I do now? Mm-hmm. And I mean, you've just given us a huge list of things that I think can really be helpful. I
did actually one more question before we kind of wrap up.
Sure.
Besides you gave the information of the disclosure and empathy and so many tips, is there anything else that you suggest for someone how to rebuild trust back?
Thank you for the question. One of the things that I found in rebuilding trust, it actually starts with that process we went through. When I have the information, when I recognize that you're willing to be open with me, especially, and I want to reemphasize this, in my research, this is some of the most critical findings I found. Gaslighting, which is hiding behaviors, being deceptive, hidden behaviors, is linked to the highest levels of trauma that we can find. So the higher the level of manipulation, deception, gaslighting, the higher the levels of the post-traumatic stress symptoms.
Mm.
So I would say if you're going to heal, you have to address the deception, the gaslighting that occurred, the hidden behaviors. If you really want to accelerate your healing, you've got to learn how to be authentic and deal with the deceptive behaviors. That is based upon the research. There's nothing that holds betrayed partners back more than unresolved deceptive behaviors.
Mm.
Yeah.
So if you're being dishonest still, you got to learn the skills to be able to come out in the open and be fully open and honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's just it. The deceptiveness, if we can deal with that. So if I could leave any core component, it's that. And then the final one that I would suggest is learn how to be better in relationships. I believe that most of your listeners, they want to be better in relationships. They want deeper connections. They just don't know how. They don't know what to do, what to say in these crucial moments. And as a result, they feel stuck. Don't know what to say, don't know what to do. So we've talked a lot about a lot of information, but learning how to be better in relationships should be your ultimate goal.
Yeah.
It's not recovery. It's not overcoming the trauma. It's actually learning how to be most effective in your relationships so you can form deep, intimate bonds and connections.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I think we all want, right? Is those deeper connections, that intimacy, but unfortunately, most of us haven't learned that in our homes, right?
We weren't taught it.
Yeah. We weren't taught that. But the thing that I want to give to people is that it is something you can learn. If we don't know it and we don't know how to do it and we weren't taught it, we can learn it. And that's, so you are worth the investment, right? Whether it's reading a book, going to an intensive, doing a disclosure, the therapist, like if you are worth that and you can learn it. And, that's what you teach. That's what Hunter teaches. That's what we all do here, is to teach those skills and to teach those things that we just didn't know.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Well, Kevin, how can our listeners find you if they've really just taken a lot from this and want to tap into more of your resources? Where should they go?
Let me just tell you, absolutely appreciate being with you guys. I appreciate what you're doing and the work you're doing. So I will just say the best way to get a hold of me, my website, humanintimacy.com. I'm more than just about recovery and dealing with the trauma. My goal is to actually help people have better relationships. So humanintimacy.com is where I put most of my content. I have a 100-day recovery course for those who have been acting out. I have a 100-day for betrayed partners. I have courses on there, but I'm really excited. On March 14th and 15th of this year, 2025, we have a conference, the first annual Human Intimacy Conference. Day 1 is for betrayed partners and those who've been acting out. Day 2 is for couples and healing. We have experts throughout the country, certified sex addiction therapists, over 20 therapists with 400 years of clinical experience are going to be at this conference. And so some seasoned professionals are going to be talking about the recovery process, how to rebuild trust, how to deal with shame. It's an incredible conference. We actually have a yoga expert. She's a trauma-informed yoga specialist. She's going to be doing yoga with the betrayed partners. We are going to have a phenomenal day, 2 days at this conference. You can learn more at humanintimacy.com. And to your listeners, we can actually give them a discount if they're interested.
No, awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kevin. This has been just a joy to be able to have this conversation with you and learn and just grow together. I just really appreciate your time.
Yeah, and like Kevin mentioned too, if you're a man and you're struggling with compulsive acting out behaviors, dishonesty, getting in an environment that can support you, where you can learn to hold yourself in warm regard, where you can get skills, where you can be encouraged by others in a healthy way and encouraged in your relationship in a positive way. That's critical. That's something that we offer. And we have a free community if you want to get started for free. It's called the Porn Free Brotherhood. I'll put a link below. And then if you're wanting like another step-by-step guide, we have our Revolution community. You can join that. We even have a 6-week marriage course that's in there as well to learn the skills that we're talking about here that we just are not taught by our parents because they didn't have them. No one taught them those skills. So again, there is help. Kevin, thanks so much. This has been fantastic. It's just really good to reconnect with you.
Awesome. Good to see you guys, and thanks to your listeners for being with us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.